like to pass around a resource page that will list, this will tell you the books I'm going to mention, any websites I mention, and it will just give you some great online resources as well. So if you would like to take one of those, you can put notes on the back. And any information I share that didn't come directly from my own gardening came from these resources. So you yourself can also reference them. I also noticed the pack of seeds in hand, Marty, and it made me think that I should explain. Can you hold yours up? I didn't bring them. I didn't explain that little tub of seeds in the back, but they came from King County Noxious Weed organization, and they had a great number of them at the Northwest Flower and Garden Show. And when I started talking to them about pollinators, they gave me just an armload of them. So feel free to take these seeds if you'd like. Yes, Joe is holding them up. So that's where they came from. They're from King County Noxious Weed Commission.
So it's a packet of noxious weeds?
Well, they're saying plant these and not those. I don't know. You can read the packet and sort that out, I suppose.
That's what was called a joke.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. April Fools. April Fools. Okay, you guys are definitely going to keep me on my toes. All right, so tonight we'll take a look at some of the many native pollinators that might be found in Puget Sound gardens, parks, and natural areas. The majority of the photos were taken by my daughter Megan in our garden, including those seen here. We'll look at the characteristics that identify each of these insects as a fly, a wasp, or a bee. And I'll also discuss features in the landscape that allow pollinators to live in close proximity to human activity. A pollinator can be any insect, bird, or animal that transfers pollen from one flower to another flower of the same species, resulting in the formation of fruit and seeds. Birds, butterflies, bees, beetles, wasps, hummingbirds, and any creature that visits flowers may contribute to pollination. This morning cloak butterfly is on Pacific ninebark. If you go to a plant retailer in our area, you will most likely find the East Coast species of ninebark for sale. While Physocarpus is the genus for ninebark throughout North America, only Physocarpus capitatus is native to Puget Sound. Because native plants best meet the needs of our native pollinators, it's worth the effort to seek out specialty nurseries and get our native plants. Some examples would be Tadpole Haven in Woodinville, MSK Nursery in Shoreline, and also Go Natives in Shoreline, in addition to Washington Native Plant Society sales, and the Audubon chapter also has sales. Yes?
And Stillwater's Environmental Center in Kingston.
Okay, and Kingston, thank you for Across the Water, appreciate it. So, anyone who aspires to garden for butterflies and plants, and includes native plants, will be doing a good job of encouraging other pollinators to come to their garden. When we moved to this half-acre property in Briar in South Snohomish County in the autumn of 1987, it was little more than a vacant lot. That white shed is still there today, so when I show you the next photo, you can compare them. The trees in the middle were diseased. We had to remove them. You can see what the not really a lawn looked like. And so there were no birds coming at all, which really surprised me with that green belt that we had behind us. And so that winter, with the help of materials from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, we began to plant trees with birds and wildlife in mind. Today we have Russell Link's book, Landscaping for Wildlife in the Pacific Northwest, and also the National Wildlife Federation has Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife. Together, those organizations offer voluntary habitat certification, and by certifying property, a person assists, promotes, and supports community education and school programs that help get the word out and encourage the creation of wildlife-friendly gardens. or even preserving habitat. The Wildlife Federation also has an online resource center. That's an excellent place to go for more information. And to see the results of using those materials, we fast forward 25 years later. And that's how it looks today, so you can't see the white shed anymore. And we are looking at, there are blueberries here, and we have apples that we share with wildlife because we don't really mind, there's an abundance, and we avoid using chemicals in this garden. There's a vegetable garden in the middle, and these are all very butterfly, pollinator-friendly native plants and garden perennials. I'll show you a close-up in a few minutes. This area has a pond, more like a bog garden that we created. And behind that is a tall grass. I call it the meadow. It's not very big, but it is a little bit of tall grass with some of the shorter shrubs, such as our native spireas. And then over here on the side, we have an evergreen hedgerow that offers shelter to pollinators and other creatures in bad weather and at nightfall. And it also screens the neighbors, and that's a mixture of native plants and non-native plants. So these are some of the kind of things I know most of you probably don't want to or intend to garden at this scale, or maybe you don't have that much space, but you can use small elements of this, and I encourage you to do so, because even if you just have a planter box on a patio, that's a start. And it's pretty amazing what will come to visit, even just your very most basic beginnings of offering food to our wildlife. So if we go back to the orchard, it leads into an area where I've got the native shrubs and trees planted, and this is the 9-bark we just looked at. This is red elderberry. There's some mock orange here, and this is a bitter cherry. There's serviceberry, you can't really see it. But this specific dogwood was the size of a pencil, planted about 22 years ago. So also don't be afraid to start small. It's pretty incredible what happens if you just get started. This is a closer look at the far back area, and you can see where shrubs such as Rhododendron macrophyllum, or Pacific rhododendron, and red huckleberry are surrounded by ground covers, ferns, and other native shrubs that offer nectar and pollen throughout the season. There's an example of the layering. We start with ground covers, upward to ferns, mid-sized shrubs, taller shrubs, and then upward to the trees. Before focusing on the native pollinators, I'll give a quick summary of some of the problems occurring with the European honeybee, Apis mellifera. In the 1990s, and perhaps even a little bit earlier, parasitic mites were introduced to the U.S. And since then, the honeybee has been in decline. By 2006, a new threat was recognized as colony collapse disorder, or CCD. Since then, honeybees have been experiencing sudden disappearance and severe decline. By 2009, 1/4 of all U.S. honeybees had died, equaling tens of billions of bees. Scientists believe that what occurred at that time was a combination of the parasites, pathogens, and pesticides, all contributing to the demise of the honeybees. Insect pollination is required for 2/3 of the world's food crops. 75% of all flowering plants require and depend on pollinators. Estimates in the value of native pollinators have been made since we are losing so many honeybees. New research has started to look into what native pollinators are doing in agriculture, and it's been found that their value ranges from $3 billion to $40 billion annually. in assisting crop production in the United States. This is the blue orchard mason bee, Osmia lignaria. And it is a solitary pollinator. It doesn't belong to a hive or a colony. They become active in March through early June at the right time to pollinate fruit trees. Because they do not have a hive or a nest to defend, they are gentle and unlikely to sting. 250 mason bees can pollinate 1 acre of apple trees, where 15,000 or more honeybees would be required, equivalent to 1.5 to 2 honeybee hives. Part of the reason for the mason bees' efficiency is the way they contact the flower. They dislodge more pollen, and it sticks to their body. And they also fly in cooler temperatures and are more active at those temperatures than honeybees. The mason bee requires mud for its nest, and the old-fashioned nest block is no longer recommended because they're difficult to clean. New designs can be taken apart so that in autumn, a fungal disease known as chalk brood and parasitic mites can be removed. However, in Puget Sound, we have rentmasonbees.com, and that's a very reliable way to avoid dealing with those problems. They will take care of cleaning and maintenance at a reasonable fee, and I believe they're on your resource list. The mud in the pot in the bog garden is dug from the soil, and it's the right consistency for the bees to use. And so if we look at this shed door, that's the shed. This is a door that we don't open. And in that opening, those are brood cells for the mason bee. And it's probably located about 12 to 15 feet from the mud in the pond. And really didn't know what that was, didn't really pay attention to it. And a few years ago when we were needing to paint the shed and open the door, I was really glad I knew what those were, because most people would have scraped them right out of there. And they're just little white larvae in the mud, and so quickly closed it back up again. Yes?
Do you want questions now or later?
I'm fine, you can ask questions now.
So is this mason bee suffering from colony collapse disorder and issues like that as well?
Well, no, because they're solitary, so they're not in a colony, but all native bees are considered under threat and in decline, but I think there needs to be a lot. What I'm hearing is that the studies are starting up. We don't really have the baseline studies for native pollinators to accurately answer that.
So is that where they, let's say their home, their hive, or whatever you want to call it?
Well, that's a nest block
Okay.
that people have provided.
Otherwise, they would find something unknown in nature.
Right, or, they make use of a space like that.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and maybe you'll address this later on, but I was reading an article in the Sierra Club magazine and it was talking about the monarch decimation as well. And it was kind of threading the colony collapse disorder pesticide problem with the monarch problem and some GMO corn that's all throughout the Midwest. Maybe you'll address that later.
We will touch on some of those things later in the program. And the problem with this topic is that it's like an accordion unfolding. There's really a lot of information, and all I get to do is just touch base and just kind of recap everything. And but that will be coming up, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was kind of wondering, so with them not being in colonies, would only one mason bee, like for that pod, do others come and they just avoid the area? Like how do they go about their business being solitary? Like they don't ever come into contact with other mason bees, or?
Well, they do. What we'll see in a few minutes with a lot of the native bees, even the solitary bees, will group their solitary nests in the same area, partly because that's where they find what they need to have a nest. But so they're still considered solitary and individual nests, but they're in close proximity.
So they're just not hives.
Right. They don't have a queen, they don't have workers, they don't have that organized colony going on. So back in the garden, we are looking at some goldenrod and garden perennials that were originally planted for the butterflies. And the goldenrod is a native plant. And I really enjoyed packing that in with our with our garden perennials because it attracts so many native pollinators. So having started out trying to attract butterflies and ending up here having attracted pollinators, we're going to start out with the next section and talk about the butterflies first and then go on to the pollinators. And so this is a photo by Dave Nunnally, thank you. He probably recognizes it, yes. And this is the Echo Blue, Echo Azure butterfly larva on an unopened flower buds of red osier dogwood. And so, as you can see, native pollinators especially need native host plants for their larva stage. I think we often overlook that the adult butterfly, and this is an adult Echo Blue, is really just exhibiting one stage of its entire life cycle. And this butterfly is sunning on the leaf of Oregon grape, which offers protection and really flowers that are really rich in nectar in early April right now. Some of them may have started in March further south where some of you live. And so the Echo Blue, you probably heard us talking about that before the program began, is the Pacific or the Puget Sound region's species of the spring azure butterfly. And that's been identified by Washington Lepidopterus. Does anybody want to jump in on that? Do you guys feel like we covered it enough earlier? Okay, enough said on that. All right. So some other host plants for the Echo Blue include ocean spray, red elderberry, and Douglas spirea, as well as other native spireas and other native flowering shrubs. Here we have a Lorcan's Admiral. Do you think I should put a box? Is that wavering screen bothering anybody? No, okay. So that's a Lorcan's Admiral, and it's sunning in a protected spot by that tan shed. Its host plants are willow, serviceberry, bitter cherry, and others. This group of butterflies requires nettles for its larval stage. At the top is a red admiral or admiral, and in the middle is satyr anglewing, and below that is Milbert's tortoiseshell. There are several other butterflies that prefer nettles when they're available, and so nettles are especially worth preserving in native growth protection areas, parks, and green belts. They're very tough to grow. I have tried them. I have some, but I don't really recommend it.
If we wanted to try to grow
Nettles.
nettles like Circia meduli, where would we?
Oh, well now, Circia meduli is a thistle. And it's very hard to come by. And so I would love to grow some of it. It's a native thistle, and our native thistles are not available for us to grow. They grow in the wildlands, but nobody's produced them commercially. Yes, did you want to add to that?
Oh, no, I just had a question. So with such a warm winter and early spring this year, the change of maybe the host plants, like, is there a lot more sightings recently than in past years, just because it is such an early spring?
David Droppers is nodding his head yes. He's saying yes.
I'm getting a lot of really early records for things online.
So yeah, if you just follow the plants, and they will lead you to the butterflies. So this is West Coast Lady, Vanessa Annabella. I really like saying that name, it's so pretty. And we don't see very many of them. Their favorite host plants are, their preferred host plants, stinging nettle and checker mallow, Sidalcia genus. And this one did happen by, and that is our photo, which I'm just kind of surprised we got it. But Perhaps we'd see more of these butterflies if we had more of these plants in our neighborhoods. This woodland skipper is finding nectar on purple coneflower in the garden, but it requires tall grass free of chemicals for its larva stage. The larva is not very pretty and makes me think that it's important that we remember that even beneficial insects often have an unattractive phase, and that we shouldn't go reaching for chemicals and make assumptions, because this is where the woodland skipper butterfly comes from. The western tiger swallowtail larvae, in particular, need our native trees. Cottonwood is on the left, willow, and big leaf maple species are widely available. And so this is a butterfly that we commonly see. And because the trees are tall, they're also out of reach of most of the pesticides. So I imagine that helps their larvae survive. Here the western tiger swallowtail is seen on some milkweed growing in our garden, and I'll show you some more pictures of that. But even though butterflies are really fantastic, they wait for the warm, sunny days, and this year's not too bad, but most years you can wait a really long time for the butterflies to come. Yes?
Does it matter what type of milkweed?
I'll cover milkweed a little more in a few minutes. And so what started to happen in our garden is that while we're waiting for butterflies on the warm, sunny days, we began to notice that the bumblebees were coming out in cool weather from the mid to upper 40s, cloudy, sometimes even in the rain. I mean, just really startling, the conditions that they are out flying in. And so with so many pollinators, and bumblebees in particular, we began looking for an opportunity to learn more about them. In 2012, we became aware of a citizen science study being done by grad student Hillary Burgess in the purple shirt, and that's Megan, our photographer for many of these photos. And Hillary was interested in studying the correlation between native plants in gardens and the effect that would have on native pollinators. She wanted to know if pollinator abundance would be something measurable if there were more native plants in the habitat. And here they are observing pollinators that year. So the rest of this program, I'll share with you what I learned from being part of Hillary's Citizen Science Project. And to do that, we'll start with the sometimes tricky or confusing, not too bad, but it can be a little bit, the work of identifying whether these are wasps, flies, or bees. Wasps and bees share many characteristics. They both have long antennae, eyes toward the sides of the head, and 4 wings. Bees differ in that they are collecting pollen to use for their larvae. They want to feed the brood cells pollen as a protein source. So bees, in addition, have a lot of hair on their body and legs, and that's known as scopa. They're branched hairs. And if we look at this bee on the left, we can see that it has quite a furriness to its thorax and its legs and even under its abdomen. So those are characteristics that identify that as a bee. Wasps do not provision their brood cells with pollen. They usually capture prey for a protein source. And so they don't need as much hair to collect the pollen. Sky drama going on. You can tell which one is a wasp by its narrow waist, its pointed abdomen, and you can see that it's a little bit shiny because it lacks those hairs. On the bottom right, well, it kind of looks bee-like, and in the past I might have thought that, but if you look closely, you will see that it is a fly, because flies have very short antennae, and they have eyes across the top of the head rather than on the sides. Flies also have 4 wings, but that's very difficult to discern on a living insect.
Julie, did you
Yes.
were those all from your yard?
Mm-hmm.
Was the bee a honeybee?
None of these are honeybees. This on the left,
That-
a native bee. Okay, we have entomology students. I love to call on you. Anybody like to guess what kind of bee on the left?
That's really
Or
good.
use an educated guess, we should call it. I realize it's not under a microscope where it's got all those wonderful features.
It's hard to say, it's only day two.
It's only day 2. That's a great answer.
It's not there yet.
We have a lot. I'm thinking we thought it might be a mining bee, but again, you know, it's living. We didn't have it in hand to really take it apart and look at it. So we think it might be a mining bee. It is one of my favorite little bee faces anywhere. It's pretty precious. Okay, so we'll begin with bumblebees. In North America, there are approximately 46 species of North American bumblebees. In Puget Sound, we have as many as 16 in the region, I should say, because I think some of those are a little bit mid to upper elevation than what we really have down here at sea level. These bees, at first glance, may look like they're all the same. However, if you look more closely, you'll see that the tail segments on this bee are orange, characteristic of Bombus mixtus, and the tail segments on this bee are black, characteristic of Bombus melanopygus, the black-tailed bee. And they are on coffeeberry. And coffeeberry is native to California and is a coastal plant. It's amazing for attracting pollinators, and this plant came mail order from Forest Farm Nursery. It's also where we got our pencil-sized Pacific dogwood 22 years ago. So if you can't find something locally, Forest Farm Nursery in Oregon is an excellent source of some very unusual and beneficial native plants. This bumblebee is on a native spirea, Spirea splendens, our subalpine spirea of mid to upper elevations. And I'm showing this picture because it has a big orange bump on its hind leg. And so that bump is a pollen basket or corbicula. And only female bees have a corbicula because they are the worker bees that are gathering the pollen that they're taking back to the colony to feed the larvae in the brood cells. So if you see that, you know you have a female worker bee. And that's just a really pretty bee picture, but there is something to say about this and the plant. So this gorgeous yellow bee, bright yellow bee, has confounded us for the last 3 years. And the reason is that there are several species of bumblebees that have a yellow phase. So bumblebees' color can change from workers to queens, males to females, kind of the same thing, at different times in the season. And so there are different color phases, which if you go online and look at some of the ID charts for bumblebees, you'll see there's 5 or 6 different ways one species of bumblebee can look. But it's still a really nice picture, and it shows the wing veins, which is one of the characteristics that entomologists would use to help identify the species. Yes?
Is there a way to look at a bee and know for sure it's a queen bee? Like, is there some certain aspect? Because, I mean, we're not allowed to catch queen bees, and I don't want to go and try to catch a queen bee if I'm not supposed to be catching it.
That's a terrific question. So as you get to know the bumblebee species that you're looking at, you're going to know when one is virtually twice as big as all the others, and you'll know it's a queen. Yes?
I'm not sure if you're going to get back to butterflies, but I just had a question.
Sure. It's okay.
So if some pollinators and butterflies share the same native plant, how does that affect their pollinating/survival?
Oh, as if they might use too much nectar from one source?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I don't know that concentrations of the insects are enough. I suppose if you had one plant of something and they all needed that, but probably those populations are going to disperse to where there is adequate food source. Yes?
The biggest competition issue is between honeybees
Yes.
and native bees. Honeybees tend to outcompete for nectar, and where hives are found, the native bees may suffer and may not be able to reproduce adequately. But I haven't seen anything about.
Ariana, that's such a great point. So she's saying that the biggest competitor for bumblebees are the honeybees. And there are some pretty opinionated people about that are upset about that. But here's what I've noticed in my garden, because there are so many European flowers mixed in with so many native flowers. The honeybees favor the European flowers, and the native bumblebees favor the native plants. So I'm really enjoying watching that, and I've wondered and been concerned about that because certain plants have so many honeybees on them. But it appears that, of course, that's a pretty big nectar buffet we've put out for them, so they have a little room to take advantage of a variety of plants.
You've got the mass,
Yeah.
the masses of plants.
Yes.
I know it might just be a lack of studies done on it, but perhaps one of the reasons that native bees aren't experiencing the same parasites that the Europeans are, because they aren't attracted to the certain crops, maybe.
Well, there are some problems. There are some problems with that, yeah. I'll touch just a little bit on it in a few minutes. And I don't know enough about it to really speak well, except for what I'm going to say in a few minutes. But I think there are some crossover problems.
There are
Yeah.
with
Ariana,
honeybees
do you-
especially.
Yes, yeah, we'll get to it. Okay, hold on. All right, so the plant is Heuchera sanguinea, and it is native to New Mexico and Arizona. Not really here in Puget Sound, but it's closely related to Heuchera macrantha, or small flowered alum root, which is our native plant. And both of these...
Flower what?
Oh, Heuchera is spelled H-E...
No, small flower what?
Small flowered alum root.
Okay, almond.
Yeah. It's Heuchera, just H. macrantha, and you might be able to find it. And both are excellent plants for pollinators. Bumblebees in particular really like these plants. So even though they're not native, I think it's similar with coffeeberry in that they aren't so far away geographically. They're on the same continent, and it seems like that's a better correlation than having something from Europe growing as far as meeting the needs of the pollinators. And of course, native plants remain the best. So this bumblebee is Bombus vosnesensky, and you can see that it has a very yellow face, so its common name is the yellow-faced bumblebee. This is probably the most common bumblebee that we have in the region at this time. And it's an excellent pollinator. It's abundant, so I feel fairly confident in telling you that's Bombus vosnesensky. But we have two other less common species of bumblebee that really look close to identical in coloration. The size might be a little different. And so I just caution you about that identification piece. And here, just the point that berries of all kinds, whether they're native berries or cultivated berries, are excellent for pollinators and vice versa. And so this is a blueberry in our garden on top, and below is the evergreen huckleberry. They're both the genus Vaccinium. And encourage you, if you don't grow too many other things, grow a blueberry, you need to, or a evergreen huckleberry, because I think you'll be pleased for both people and for the pollinators. So back to the milkweed, and I'm going to do a little series on milkweed here for a few minutes. Milkweed is that tall, leggy plant you see with the little pom-pom flowers. And I'm not recommending you grow that because this thing, it isn't even the species I thought I was getting. It turned out to be a different species when I got it planted. And so this is the East Coast species of milkweed, and it is running rampant, and I'm letting it do that. But most people will not want that in their garden. And it comes up through the grass, it comes up everywhere. And the milkweeds for your garden are listed on the left, and they are available at plant nurseries. And they're really lovely plants. They're very pretty, they're way easier to grow, and you can acquire them. So by August, the milkweed was blooming, and Megan, who had taken photographs all summer, was getting very good at recognizing most of the bees. And she noticed that this one was different. So I'm going to see if the next picture brings it in a little better. That bumblebee has a very white tail segments. And so we hadn't seen anything like that in the garden. You can see how attracted to the milkweed it is. And so she took some photos, sent them to the Xerces Society in Portland. Xerces Society sent them to Stanford, and Stanford confirmed that this was Bombus occidentalis, the now rare western bumblebee. So this photo was taken by Rich Hatfield, of the conservation biologist for the Xerces Society, and this is a picture of the western bumblebee on a spirea in Oregon. And this is, there's a lot of material there. I'm going to attempt to read it from my little PowerPoint notes because I fear I will leave something out. Okay. To make sense of what happened to these bees, it helps to know that the bumblebees can beat their wings as fast as 130 times per second. This allows them to heat themselves and fly in cooler weather than most insects. It also lets them use buzz pollination to vibrate the flowers of many New World crops. This makes them more efficient than honeybees for pollinating crops such as cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, and blueberries. In the 1990s, the western bumblebee queens were sent to Europe, where Bombus occidentalis was being raised with the intent of using them to pollinate greenhouse-grown crops. Let's see if I can forward this up. When the bees were returned to the United States, it is believed they came with a pathogen, Bombus, or Nosema bombii is the pathogen. Since then, this bumblebee has virtually disappeared. Scientists are particularly concerned because Franklin's bumblebee, which is closely related, native to Oregon and California, is already considered extinct. So finding this bumblebee was pretty exciting and made some news, as some of you know. And keep an eye out for it. To recognize this bee, look for that white tail segment and a black face. And I do have just a handful of identification folders, so see me at the end if you'd like one of those. The last bumblebee we'll look at in this segment is a California bumblebee, Bombus fervidus. Can't really see its black face, but you can tell there's no yellow on that head, and it is digging deep into a native plant called fairy bells, or Prosardes smithii. In total, we identified 9 species of bumblebee that summer, and really learned a lot and enjoyed our work. So we're going to go on to talk about some solitary bees that we saw. And I can tell you what I think this one or that one is, but instead we'll just focus on that there are many solitary bees that come to the garden. They are sweat bees, leafcutter bees, carpenter bees, mining bees, and we'll see some nest situations for some of those bees in a minute. I especially like this little guy down here. Look how small that bee is, and look at all the pollen on the scopa on this bee's legs and body. And that bee is probably one of the small sweat bees. There's been some disagreement when I've talked to entomologists about that bee. It's just a photo. We don't have it under a microscope. And here we have the appearance of a leafcutter bee, to be absolutely correct, I'll say it that way. You can see the wing vein patterns, and also the shortened body help distinguish this bee. And that's on the native fleabane. And this is another one of the mining bees, and it is on goat's beard in this picture. And you can see it has a great deal of scopa on its legs and body, and I don't think you can make it out, but there's scopa on the lower side of its abdomen as well. In the last few years, the European wool carder bee has arrived in the Puget Sound area. This bee from Europe first landed on the east coast of the United States and has now made its way into the Puget Sound region. This is an aggressive territorial bee, and it's not yet known how it will affect native pollinators. Does anyone have information about this bee they'd like to share?
I talked to Evan about it a few months ago, and he said there's no data indicating that it chases other bees away, but when I've been out there, it'll chase you away.
It'll chase it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun to watch the males chasing the females. And,
Yes.
You know, but it is a little bit concerning. I don't know that anybody's really doing any studies.
So here's an interesting piece. Yes, this is a territorial aggressive bee. Well, I have a little plant, an herb, in my garden. Herbs are very attractive for pollinators. And it's called Teucrium, Teucrium, Teucrium. It's from Europe, pretty sure. And anyway, that is the favorite plant of this wool carder bee. So they're territorial around that Teucrium, which really saves the rest of that area for the other bees. So that could be a strategy too, to lure them to something that the other bees don't care
Is it a
about.
purple flower?
It is a small lavender flower, and it's low growing, yes.
I have to say they are very aggressive, like being in Kentucky, I've come into contact with those yellow jacket red wasps. And yellow jackets and red wasps are known to be aggressive, and I've been chased by them as a kid and everything. But the scariest experience are these, because they won't stop. I mean, even when you get out of their territory, they're
They
still
keep
gonna
going.
you, like, prove the point to stay away from that area.
So now the rest of you can keep your eye out for these. They almost look like a wasp. They have distinctive yellow coloration on their legs and their body. And so if you see this bee wasp looking thing, but you can also see that it's got scopa, it's probably the European wool carder bee. Yes?
Is this also a solitary bee? Or is it?
Oh, that's a very,
It is.
Hariana says yes.
It is,
Mhm.
and the males, if they're like all the other males, will not be able to sting. So they're just aggressive, they just bully you.
Yes, they're
They can't
bullies.
sting you.
There we go. So here we have a very wasp-like looking bee, but they're also pretty interesting to look at. So these are Nomada bees. The genus is Nomada. And these are all from the garden, all garden photos. And the thing that's so interesting about this bee is that it's known as a cuckoo bee. And cuckoo bee is just a colloquial term used for bees and wasps that are parasitic on other bees and wasps. So the Nomada bee doesn't collect pollen. What it does is it lays its eggs in the nests of other bees and lets when their egg hatches, it eats the pollen for the host larva. So take a moment. I bet you know what that is, because it's one of our favorite little flies, the hoverfly, or syrphid fly, or flower fly. And again, we can look at eyes across the top of the head, very small antennae. And it's pollinating a blackberry flower. And here we have several species of the hoverfly. And these are bottle flies. They come in colors of green, blue, and bronze. And they are acting as pollinators. They even have single hairs on their body rather than the branched hairs of the bumblebees and other bees.
What do you call them?
Bottle. Bottle fly. So if you ever see something that looks like a housefly, but it's really kind of pretty and it stops you and you're looking at that's a bottle fly.
A little bit bigger too, maybe?
They might be a little bigger. The color is really very nice. So this is a very bee-like, looks like a bumblebee. But you can see on the left, eyes on the top of across the top of the head and barely see any antennae there at all. And so this is a Narcissus bulbfly, Meridon equestris. Just pretty pictures. Now wasps also act as pollinators as they walk around on a flower. This is a bee wolf, an adult bee wolf, and it is getting nectar for its own food supply, but it has single hairs on its body. They're not as obvious, but it does act as a pollinator, and the single hairs do drag pollen around from flower to flower. The bee wolf has a carnivorous name because it catches bees to feed to its larvae. So it is another parasitic, and I think most wasps are actually parasitic. So, you know much
Predators.
They're predators. Thank you. Okay, for clarifying. terrifying predators. This is a Chrysura wasp, and it is a cuckoo wasp, which is parasitic, to clarify that. Look at the small forget-me-not flower and the moss for a sense of scale. So this is tiny, just on a little bit of mud in the garden.
Have you had all of these in your garden?
These are all from the garden. And so I haven't figured out where to work this into the program, but an important point is that part of it, yes, garden for wildlife and habitat and plant native plants, but the other part of it is that green belt. Because what that green belt provides behind us is a pathway. And so having these native areas connect is a really important part of that. And so I often look at my neighbors' backyards and wish they would just string, you know, we're kind of perpendicular to that green belt, it runs the other way, and I wish they would just start a string of native plants along the back of our properties and start making that connection to other green belts, but it hasn't happened yet. So I know some of you know about the pollinator pathway, and so that's part of that concept too, is getting this connectivity into our native plantings.
What's that green plant right there?
Moss.
Oh, that's right, it's small.
That's small. This is a potter wasp. It builds a mud nest, and it is a beneficial wasp that feeds on the larvae of spruce budworm and alfalfa weevil. And I kind of like these guys, even though they're a wasp. Beetles also play a role in pollination. They are considered the first pollinators. I'm going to check my notes on this one too. They are considered the first pollinators of the Jurassic era flowering plants 150 million years ago, whereas more modern pollinators are considered to have come on the scene 100 million years ago. So the beetles go back the furthest. There still remain important pollinators of plants with primitive flower characteristics. Tunnels made by beetle larvae may be used by other insects, including some of the bees we've mentioned earlier. And this beetle is foraging on Pearly Everlasting, a native flower also used by butterflies and sweat bees.
You said he's eating the flower?
Well, it looks like that, but it's either getting nectar or pollen from the flower, or both. So we'll move on to some of the features in the garden that are important. And I know you all know that it's important to avoid chemicals. But if you can encourage friends and neighbors and families or influence them in some way, that's really important. We encourage them not to stop using, because then you shut people down. So the new teaching is considered to encourage people to use chemicals selectively, target very specific and limited plants, avoid broad spectrum products. And so just try to become less damaging with the use of chemicals. Be aware that manufacturer recommendations are often 10 times greater for home use than they are for agricultural use. Even Bacillus thuringiensis, a natural product, kills butterfly larvae. More than 1 billion tons of pesticides are used in the US annually. So choosing food that's organic is one thing that we can do to not buy into this wholesale use of pesticides. And it's something to think about, because 1 billion tons of pesticides are used on not just the fruit and the vegetables, but wheat, cotton, corn, and soy in the US every year. It's astronomical, it's out of control. So these are flowers of the linden tree, and some of you may remember in 2013, 50 linden trees were sprayed in Wilsonville, Oregon. Close to 100,000 bees, 50 to 100,000 bees, bumblebees, were killed in that spraying, and it's thought to represent, by the Xerces Society, approximately 300 wild bumblebee colonies. The problem with linden tree is that these flowers are small and inconspicuous, and linden trees are not native to our area. They attract aphids, so they become very sticky, and that results in people wanting to spray them. They don't even notice there are bees way up there, and that's what happens. So, you know, it's a good cause to advocate for the native plants, or at least use something that won't put pollinators at risk unnecessarily. Reducing lawn is one of the easiest things you can do, even if you don't plan to plant anything. By reducing lawn, you expose soil for potential nest sites for ground nesting bees. And these are the little holes and tunnels of mining bees, and each bee has its own nest, its individual nest, but you can see how they're grouped together, probably because that was just the right location with those conditions.
Is that sort of sandy soil?
This is sandy soil, which they often prefer. Most ground nesting bees prefer sandy soil or loam, and I'll go into some of the nesting requirements for bees at length in a moment. Douglas Tallamy is an entomologist from Delaware who wrote the book Bringing Nature Home, and he states that in the United States, and he wrote this in 2009, that we have converted an area more than 8 times the size of New Jersey to lawn. He further says that if we converted half of that back into native plants, we would have 20 million acres become available to pollinators, butterflies, and other creatures. And that's a little bee. That's its head. And there's its antennae on one side you can see, and that's its little face. And another solitary bee are the leafcutter bees. And these are fireweed leaves, and you can see the precision with which they cut out the pieces they need. The elongated cuts are for the sides of their nest, and the round cuts are for the ends of their nest. Serviceberry, Amelanchier alnifolia, our native serviceberry, is also used in this way, and I'll add some of those photos next time I get a chance. Looks the same.
Have you had any roses or legume leaves treated that way?
No.
Okay. I've seen them,
Have you?
yeah, do that on my peas and roses, but not here down in Oregon, California. They'll just cut a leaf really, really quick. It's just seconds. And then the female will pack it underneath her abdomen and carry it off.
Yeah. So one of the things that occurs in gardens, and it's one of the problems with plant lists, what to plant for butterflies, pollinators, is there'll be this big list of plants, and I know this because I've been working on it for over 20 years, and I'll go and put everything that's in a list and find out it doesn't work in my garden. And I think the reason is that I have things they like better. So sometimes when there's nothing else available, you're going to find them on peas or legumes or something that is maybe not really their first choice. So when you get enough things planted, you can start to see what they're picking and choosing. Create meadows. Meadows, tall grass for the woodland skipper on the left, and we've got somebody else buzzing by up here. And again, the layers. So you've got ground layer grass, ground covers, up to perennials such as, for meadows, excellent perennials are lupin and pearly everlasting, aster, holly, native checker mallows. And this is a goldenrod, our excellent pollinator attracting native plants. And again, the layers go on up to mid-level shrubs, taller shrubs, upwards into the trees. And by creating multiple habitat layers, you open up more habitat to different pollinators. And so you can potentially increase diversity of pollinators by giving them more choices. And excellent plants for the meadows. Probably doesn't come better than the fireweed, but this one comes with a warning as well. Although I think Kim grows fireweed. Yeah, she's nodding. And that's the pink purple flower there. It's a pretty flower. It's used by hummingbirds, western tiger swallowtail, the bees, and then as you saw, the leaves are used by the leafcutter bees. But it has a root system that will go everywhere. So unless you have the room, just let it be somewhere else. And the goldenrod below is a little more compatible in gardens, though it will spread. So you can work with that a little better. And this is where I advocate for meadows and meadow restoration in our parklands. We don't seem to have enough of that type of restoration to bring back butterflies and pollinators in our parks. Leaf litter, value of that can't be understated. I said that wrong. Can't be overstated, excuse me. Getting tired. Okay, so leaf litter provides several things. It protects the soil and allows the nutrients to stay there. It allows things like the queen bumblebee that is exploring at ground level is right in this area. And so queen bumblebees usually overwinter underground in tunnels that are already existing, but the leaves help cover and protect those areas.
Do they have to be in sunny areas?
No, and that's a really important question because while many bees prefer a sunny, I'm not sure if I asked that, many bees prefer a sunny and dry location. They all prefer a dry location. Many of the native bumblebees will nest in the woodlands. So what's really important is that it's a natural area that's not getting disturbed. Some of our butterflies may also overwinter in leaf litter, such as the mourning cloak or cedar anglerwing. And nest sites for many bees may come in the form of pithy hollow twigs, logs that are just stacked up, so they may find cavities in there, they may find beetle tunnels in there, other areas of stacked, even sticks. Grass that's left to die back in a mound that isn't cut, and stacks of rocks. We have that open white shed in back, and it has 2x4s stacked in it, and last year we had bumblebees going into the open shed and nesting in the stacked 2x4s. So you get the picture about what they need. Snags and stumps may also provide those kind of hollows and openings for bees to create nests. The red elderberry, that's what it looks like as a shrub with the hollow pithy stems, and we're going to take a close-up look at that right here. Other plants that create such hollow stems include salmonberry, blackberry. I've got stinging nettle back there that you can look at, and fireweed. All have these pithy hollow centers that, when the twig is older, may be used by insects. And so instead of just getting rid of those, we become, neat nicks and we clean everything away. You just stack them up somewhere or make a brush pile in case something's living in those stems, they'll have a chance. And if snags are in short supply, birdhouses that were previously used, so there's nesting material in there, may become a nest site for bumblebees. And this birdhouse, that did occur. And so if that happens, boy, that's a real gift. So you've got native pollinators nesting. Go get another birdhouse for the birds. Yes?
I had that happen, and the problem was that a blue jay discovered it. So what I've been doing since then is to take a piece of this plastic mesh gutter guard and make a tube so that the entrance is extended outward so the bird can't reach in.
Great
So I thought
suggestion.
I'd mention that.
Oh, that's an excellent suggestion. So putting some guard on the opening so that birds can't get in there and wreck the nest. So in review, 70% of native bees nest underground, and they prefer exposed soil in a sunny location, undisturbed soil, avoid foot traffic, tilling or watering, well-drained areas, loam or sandy soil, and old rodent tunnels. 30% of native bees are cavity nesting, and they prefer hollow pithy twigs, dead trees with peeling bark or small tunnels, fallen logs, brush piles, rock piles, birdhouses which have been previously used, mud for species that use mud to seal brood cells, and clump-forming grass left undisturbed. To provide water, give a gently sloping surface as you would for birds, although I can't say that I see that getting used by pollinators very much. That'd still be advice. Or if you want to create your own, you can add some rocks or pieces of wood to create those kind of surfaces. And especially consider adding mud, since the mason bees and the potter wasp require mud for their nests. Just remember to use garden soil, not a potting mix. Native plants are the foundation of creating habitat and attracting pollinators. These native plants are the white ocean spray, the pink hedge nettle, and orange honeysuckle. All are nectar rich. This is a group of photos of native shrubs. And so we have twinberry, which is a shrub honeysuckle. That's tall Oregon grape, evergreen huckleberry. Used to be birch leaf spirea, I think now it's white spirea, Spirea lucida, and Spirea splendens. And this is snowberry, and snowberry is a little bit of a surprise. We don't normally think of it as a pollinator plant. It is a native shrub. It does spread, so it needs a large garden. It needs sun. But the beauty of this plant is that it attracts pollinators all summer, and the hummingbirds will even come to these flowers. And you can see, these are the berries forming. So that's been growing all summer, and you can see the smaller berries. And it's still putting out flowers and flower buds. And anyway, if you come across snowberry in the summer, check that out, and you'll see that it's an excellent plant for the pollinators. This is a comparison of goat's beard and ocean spray. They're both native plants in the rose family. And we didn't realize how similar they looked until we started taking close-up pictures of the flowers, because one is a big shrub and one is more of a perennial plant, an herbaceous
In the
plant.
distance, they look different though.
They look entirely different as a plant, but the flowers are very similar, and it gives you the feeling they're closely related. And so we have a cedar hair streak, which requires cedar for its larva stage. And then we have a hoverfly on the ocean spray. This is Cardwell's penstemon on the left with a yellow-faced bumblebee. And then on the right is Angelica arguta. And these are plants that are great for the garden, easy to grow in gardens, and probably going to need a native plant sale to find them. Camas, a native bulb of our prairies. And on the left is great camas with a bumblebee. And on the right is a honeybee on common camas. And so the Puget Sound prairies extend from, as you know, they're really actually much smaller than they used to be, but they extend from the Fort Lewis area north to the San Juan Islands and the Gary Oak communities. So this is a great garden bulb. It is available at native plant sales from the Washington Native Plant Society.
They have lots of them at Sky Nursery today.
Now they're carrying them there too. So if you get them from a nursery, try to get as close to species pure as you can. Often you'll find cultivars and sometimes hybrids and other things that have been changed with the plant. So just be on guard for that. And this is a native fleabane with a bumblebee. Very easily grown in the garden. It self-sows gently, so it does come up from seed, but one plant dies out and another 2 or 3 come up. On the left is the native checker mallow, Sidalcia genus, and on the right is our native larkspur, and that's Delphinium natalii. Again, easy to grow in the garden, beautiful flowers. And take a look, think about who that is, you probably know. That is big leaf maple. Big leaf maple leaves or flowers time their emergence. I said that backwards, let me start again. Some of our bees, including the mason bee, time their emergence to the flowers of the big leaf maple in spring. So maples are considered one of the most important pollinator shrubs along with willow. And this is our native columbine, or western columbine. And do take care to get Formosa if you get this. Canadensis is more widely available. That's the East Coast variety. It dies out in our gardens, and that's often what the nursery carries. But if you go to native plant sales, you should be able to get Aquilegia formosa. And so the bumblebee on the right doesn't fit in those long, skinny flower spurs, so it's robbing the nectar by piercing the side of the flower close to the nectar source. So in this case, the western tiger swallowtail is doing a better job pollinating this flower. And it's a good example of how multitasking native plants are, and it does the job for several species at one time. So when you provide nectar, we try to extend the season. The top right shows flowers blooming in February, and below is a native flowering currant in a snowstorm in April. And on the left, we have a single-flowered hollyhock. So if you're purchasing garden flowers, try to get those old-fashioned varieties. The single varieties are much preferred for nectar. The double varieties often don't have much nectar or much fragrance. And now we also have to beware that we're not purchasing something that is a genetically modified plant. So ask at your nursery, is this a GMO plant? Because I'm putting this in, I'm putting in a Belia for a pollinator, for bumblebees, and I need to know that it's not going to kill them. Yes?
Oh, do genetically modified plants, if it's genetically modified with pesticides, will it kill them?
Yes. GMO, so I'm just going to call them, yeah.
With pesticides though, correct?
Well, I don't know how much research is out on that. So
Actually, what is the question?
The question is, so there's different plants, like different potato plants, like the potato beetle and whatnot, that are genetically modified to have pesticides in them that can go ahead and kill those individuals. If it's a genetically modified plant without pesticides, it won't still kill the bee, will it? Or have any negative effects?
well, I don't know that that's been studied.
Okay.
I know that if it's a GMO plant that's been modified to tolerate pesticides, that's the goal, was to make these, put plants in the landscape so they can use Roundup, basically, right? Roundup Ready, right. So, you know, I'm going to the nursery and saying, well, I don't want my plant to have that. I want to be assured that this plant is going to be pollinator friendly, because that's why I'm buying it. And, you know, it's been interesting. It gets you started on some good conversations, and then the nurseries have to think about it, and they have to ask other people if anybody knows what I'm talking about. But it gets them aware that people know about that. And one nursery did say, I don't know, but last summer we had a lot of dead bumblebees here. Yes,
One of
Ariana.
the things that's really hard to check, because a lot of times I think the nurseries don't know, but if there are neonicotinoids that are in the soil as the soil soak in the plants you buy, that's systemic. It comes up into the plant, concentrates in the nectar and the pollen, that will kill bees, or at least disable their navigation system. I don't know what it is. It's probably not great for butterflies either. Now there's another interesting thing that I just saw. I get the Consumer Reports magazine. If you get it, the current issue talks about organic food, and they do mention Roundup. Now, it's a pretty I think it's a pretty conservative magazine, but they're really down on Roundup. Please do not use Roundup. The reports are coming out, it's toxic to people.
Causes cancer.
It's really bad, really, really bad. And there's some new version coming out. Please, please, please. Save your lives, save the lives of the planet, others, the other little creatures.
Right, and so, you know, I know that organic food is good, better for us, but what really made us change was learning that if you buy organic, you're avoiding GMO foods, and I want non-GMO foods, and so you need to buy organic to get that. And so it just got things really stepped up our interest in finding organic food. So this is a little more on extend the season. And the bumblebee on the right, that photo was taken at the end of November. And the bumblebee is on a strawberry bush, which is not native. It was 44 degrees out, and the butterfly, we weren't sure if it was dead, but later on in the day, it flew away. And then 3 months later, the bumblebee on the left is on crocus in February. And so it's just that extend the season piece, and it's a little hard to do that with native plants. I've really been searching for native plants that will help us extend that season, and the best one I found is manzanita. So the genus Arctostaphylotes is manzanita. And these listed above for winter flowers are cultivars that are coming out of California, and I did find them at a local nursery. Our native manzanita doesn't bloom that early, and it's very hard to find it for sale. So I'll go ahead with the California plants. And they're really lovely. They're gorgeous. They need a hot, dry, sunny location, good, sharp drainage. They won't tolerate wet feet. But they're very much worth it, and the pollinators do love them. So 2 of the best books we can take a look at for more information on this subject, Attracting Native Pollinators. It's written by the Xerces Society. The Xerces Society is named after an extinct butterfly in the San Francisco area, and was founded in 1971, I believe. They are also the leaders in pollinator conservation in North America. Bringing Nature Home on the right is the book I mentioned earlier. So for an inspiring overview of how we can help nature in our urban and suburban settings, I recommend Bringing Nature Home. So this last look at some pollinators shows a bee on the left, up top a wasp and a beetle. They're all on goat's beard, so that's my last big plug for native plants. But they do that thing of attracting more than one, and so many of the native plants also have, first you've got the pollen and the nectar, and then you go on to have the berries, or maybe they're eating the leaves, but they offer more than one feature that our wildlife and pollinators can use. So to end, I would like you to, if you're interested in getting more involved, check out Bumblebee Watch. It's started by the Xerces Society about a year ago, and there are some cards at the back table. And this invites citizens to report what they see and become part of the effort to locate and protect pollinators. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your garden. Spring is here. Ariana,
Do you ever
yes.
do tours of your garden?
I never really have, informally only so far.
Get a chance to go.
That would be really
Yeah,
great.
informal.
Yeah.
Yes.
How did you get started being this interested in this? Did you have a background or something in biology?
When I was like 11, 12, I used to collect and press wildflowers, and I really had hoped to be a botanist, so that interest was there, but it wasn't what happened, but it never went away, so habitat gardens, yes. Yes, in the back?
What do pollinators and pollinator-friendly environments attract?
What do pollinator-friendly environments attract besides pollinators? Is that the question?
And pollinators themselves.
Well, I think they kind of stand alone. For instance, though, if you are planting evergreen huckleberry for pollinators, it's going to be loaded with berries in autumn and into the winter, and you're going to have hermit thrush and all kinds of birds. It's also going to, when it gets big enough, I've got towhees nesting in my evergreen huckleberry. So you get that piece where this plant that's good for the pollinators and you're planting it for them actually serves other purposes for birds and other wildlife.
Any other questions? Thank you, Julie.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
I'd like to present Julie with a new poster from the Department of Fish and Wildlife on pollinators. Unfortunately, it includes a called the East Coast that we just